Skinwalker Ranch and the surrounding area in rural Utah is host to a terrifying level of paranormal activity that goes back hundreds of years. Everything from horrid and unexplainable cattle mutilations to UFOs, poltergeist activity, large portals in the sky, and even mind manipulation. There are so many witnesses to these events that even the most hardened skeptic has to question if there is something bizarre going on this land. Is it government experiments, alien interference, portals to another dimension, or something else? You're listening to Creep It Real, and today we're bringing you part 2 of our coverage on the Skinwalker Ranch of your dreams.
Creep It Real is a weekly podcast where we present our theories of the subjects we cover based on our interest and research. Some material may be graphic and disturbing, so proceed with caution.
So, anyway, I've been creeped out. You're creeped out.
I'm way creeped out.
Oh, but that's what I was going to say, and I don't know if I should even break the news here, but what I was going to say was, it's not like you're a stranger to this kind of stuff.
No.
Okay, but really, like, you seem to have already experienced things that I have never experienced in my life that kind of correlate to some of the stuff before we ever read about it. So don't blame it on the podcast.
Well, I'm just saying, like, I could have pilar cysts on my head, or they definitely could be alien implants. We don't know.
It's up for debate. They don't seem to want to leave, though.
Well, okay, so I was going to ask you, like, do you think, like, the activity is more prominent in smaller farm towns? There seems to be, I mean, there's always, Brazil or, like, Dubai and stuff who have a lot of activity. Mm-hmm. But I feel like, I'm like, oh, every noise that's made, I'm, like, paranoid. Get out of here! Okay, bye!
You're already jumpy, man.
Don't.
Hi, Ashley.
Hi, Kevin.
Okay. I knew I heard something. Oh dear
gosh.
God, it
hurt.
Okay.
Anyway. Really, though. We have got to... Okay. First of all,
anyway,
we're going to be okay.
Okay. So, I was going to say, the presence of, like, cornfields and, like, just farms in general seem to bring a lot of activity. And, we'll bring it up, but I just want to say, like, they bring up a lot of, like, earth disturbance and how that kind of, like, not invokes, but kind of, I guess, activity to happen. And, of course, you own a farm, you're constantly digging up the ground. Uh-huh. I was literally ready to, like, fight someone just a few seconds ago.
I don't think that we have covered any sort of story that has made me feel as
jumpy,
creeped out.
Yeah.
I was in the back, we kind of talked about it last episode, but how water seems to sometimes be some sort of gateway or some sort of something. And that's come into play on so many different things that I've looked into. Like, there are, of course, I'm going to talk about every episode that we do until we actually cover it. But missing 411, there's a big correlation to water being nearby. There's, like, all these men that have disappeared, I think, in, like, Philadelphia or somewhere in New England, where all these, like, super able-bodied, healthy young men end up being found floating in rivers and stuff. And so it's always by water. And I have the Brazos River literally in my backyard. I'm sitting here in my backyard last night, like, just every noise I hear, I'm like, that doesn't sound like a normal hog noise. Like, that's like a pig man.
Yeah.
Like, something is going on. Every little thing, I'm like, ah! So.
Well, I was going to say, like, water, I'm not a scientist, so excuse me if I'm wrong, but something about, moving water has, like, some sort of, like, electricity.
Yeah. Right.
You know, it creates energy.
I mean, we've all seen The Princess Bride.
Yes. That makes me a scientist.
The science. Yeah. Right. It can conduct electricity.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. So maybe it has something to do with that. So
I mean, who knows? I do really feel like there's got to be something just beyond what we can understand. Also, I guess we started the episode already and just in our conversation. So, hey guys, thanks for joining us here today on Creep It Real.
I've already had one heart attack already, so
we're just gonna say hi as we've already started talking, so whatever. The show has begun. We're on part 2 of Skinwalker Ranch, the Skinwalker Ranch of your dreams, and it's pretty just going to be like a onslaught of stories of experiences that had happened on the ranch, just essentially while these people, the Shermans, were living on it. So yeah, I mean, this isn't even getting into anything beyond that at this point. I don't think we're going to get to that today. But it's just while the Shermans were living on the ranch, everything that they experienced over and over and over. And also neighbors and stuff had also experienced things. But there's enough stories to fill probably a lengthy episode right now of just what the Shermans themselves experienced in the 18 to 20 months that they lived on the ranch. So
yeah, it was like, you know, they literally bought it and then like went to go live on it, and then stuff started happening, and we mentioned like the dire wolf experience.
Right. The first big thing that happened to them, which was scary, but not even to me remotely as scary as some of this other stuff goes.
Heck no. I mean, literally, just my own dog scared me earlier. It's just stupid.
I mean, and she is wearing a tinfoil hat right now, so, you know. This is first time for this. You're what?
I'm taking precautions.
Right. I'm freewheeling it today. I'm just taking my chances.
Well, you did do your hair, so I don't blame you.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter now. But anyway, so let's start telling some stories.
I mean, of course, you know, we talked about when they got to the ranch, there was bolts and locks on the inside and outside of windows, heavy chains outside the house. They had, you know, they call it, what is it, the center house?
Yeah, there's like the
mid house, the middle house. And that's where like a bulk of the activity would go on, right?
Yeah.
It was kind of like the heart of everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the very center of the ranch.
Yeah. And it wasn't, I mean, it's frustrating because there's so much going on and there's so little explanation for it. It's one of the things that stood out to me was the people on the ranch would literally feel like the earth shaking beneath their feet, and at night would hear like heavy machinery and metal operating underneath them, like it was below ground.
Right. Yeah, that was a very weird aspect of the story. I have no idea what I think that really was.
The only thing I can think of is they're living on top of Mordor, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, there was definitely something very strange about that. Because it wasn't a train or anything like that. You know?
Well, there's no train tracks nearby.
Yeah. So I have no idea what it would have been. Unless there's just like an entire clockwork of machinery underground that's like opening up a portal to another dimension. I have no idea.
Well, and like I mentioned earlier, you know, they talk a lot about like disturbing the earth, and the previous owners wanted to be notified beforehand before any digging went on the ranch, which is like, why? That's very strange.
And I think what I heard about that was that it stirred up activity, and the activity wasn't solely on the ranch. Like, it followed people off the ranch. So the former owners, I believe, put that bizarre ass clause into the whole real estate contract, because if they dug up earth on the ranch, stuff would happen at their house, I guess.
Yeah, they said that instances wouldn't end at the ranch. They continue to get not accosted.
Well, I mean, I don't know, kind of.
Yeah.
By some sort of entity.
Yeah, they continue to have experiences.
Right. So that is like something that I wanted to mention about this episode, was that it definitely followed some people off the ranch. Not everybody, but some people. And the Shermans were actually one of the people that it followed. My favorite story, I think, or that really stood out to me the most, because it really, to me, emphasizes how freaking bizarre. And what in the heck is going on? Like, what is the purpose of some of this stuff that goes on with them? Was that the Shermans were driving around their property in their truck, just checking on like fences on the cattle, just making sure everything was okay. They were driving by a pen that contained 4 of their Black Angus bulls that were 2,000 pounds each. So like freaking enormous. So big. We have one that's down the road that's probably 1,500 pounds or so. And like when we walk by, we are just like, holy crap, that thing is huge.
They are impressive animals.
Right.
They're actually one of my favorite animals just because of like how the mass alone.
Right.
And I'm quoting Mac from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, but no, I mean, you're not just gonna like, if you're unfamiliar with cattle too, you're probably not just going to walk up to this creature.
Right. I mean, they could get you real bad.
They'll get you.
And Gwen Sherman, she remarked out loud how devastating it would be if anything happened to these cattle, and luckily nothing had. They continued on driving around the property. About 45 minutes later, they were coming back past that same pen, and they realized that all 4 bulls were gone completely. So they weren't in the pen anymore. It was 45 minutes later. They didn't hear any sort of ruckus. There was none of the gates or anything like that were broken, or nothing was out of place. Everything was in complete order altogether. It didn't look like there had been some huge disaster that caused the bulls to freak out and like charge the gate or anything. No tracks like showing anything odd, no distress. It was just totally normal. And they jumped out of their car. They started searching the other pens in the surrounding area. They couldn't find them. There was no tracks. There was just no sign of anything. And Terry happened to look into a trailer that he had nearby where he kept tools. It was not big. It was fairly, decent size to keep tools in, but it's not like a trailer that you're going to go taking bulls around in or anything like that. And he looked inside, and there were all 4 of them were jammed in this little trailer and looked super dazed and kind of sedated or something like that, he said. Literally, if you look at because they soon after had the scientific team come out and they took some video and photos, but the trailer itself doesn't have some sort of a ramp or anything like that for cattle to be able to be urged up into it easily. Like there was a significant step between the inside of the trailer and the ground. And like they said, like it would be virtually impossible to get a cow to make that step period, let alone a 2,000-pound bull who is probably... I think they said were pretty mean, and you're not going to just be able to just usher 4 bulls into this pen, this cramped trailer with each other.
No.
It's like impossible. Completely. And there was, and that's the other thing. All the doors of the trailer were shut. They were locked as he had left them. Everything was in order. So what in the hell put these 4, that's 8,000 pounds of cow there in a little tool trailer and then left him there? And like they were totally dazed and not freaking out. Cause I mean, generally speaking, they would have been freaking the heck out,
Well, I've mentioned before, I grew up on a farm and we would have to get cattle in even a stock trailer, and like they don't want to go.
Right.
And like I said, they're loud.
Yeah.
And they kick things, and for 4 bulls just to be chilling in there.
Right.
And this isn't, and like you said, it's not a trailer to house, it's not a barn.
Yeah.
It's like a supply trailer.
Uh-huh. And
so
it took them like 4.5, 5 hours for Gwen and Terry to get them out of that thing back into the pen where they previously were. So I think it would take probably a whole heck of a lot more to get them in it, and that was like a 45-minute span. So I was just like, what in the world would have put those there, would have been able to put those there, didn't break any doors, didn't disturb locks, and what would the purpose of it be in the first place? And to me, and they thought the same thing, it seemed, and I know this is going to probably sound even crazier than the story itself, but they felt like there was some sentient being there that heard her remark about how devastating it would be for something to happen to those 4 cows and was kind of pranking them or threatening them in some way. Now, I don't know if that's true necessarily, but it sure seems like that would be an easy conclusion to draw whenever that is immediately following her making those remarks.
Well, yeah, and I think people assume because you raise cattle for beef that you're not very attached to them and that they're just money, but you get really attached to these animals and you do want the best for them, and unless you're a POS farmer.
No, and
but, I mean,
and they said he was like above and beyond cattle rancher. He knew,
Yeah.
you know, he was very, and he did really care about the cattle because there are thousands of dollars each, but also he did care about them and their well-being. So
I've stated before too, like they weren't just raising the cattle that they were raising were on the more expensive side,
Yeah.
and they were kind of like prized cattle.
they were, yeah.
It was what was kind of like, I don't know if it happened a lot of times, but I kind of picked up on it. It's like when they went to go tag the animals, that's when whatever was happening would like rebel against that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's because, no, those are our animals, not yours, you know,
Mhm.
because the tags that the ears were on were sliced off.
Yeah, with precision, it said.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention real quick before we moved on was that the bars of the corral that the bulls had been in had been magnetized, and it remained magnetized for a few hours, but eventually dissipated. So there's something, I don't know. Draw, you know, whatever conclusions, or if anyone knows more about anything. I don't know. Like, why would the pen be magnetized after that happened and the bulls were moved? I just don't know. But I wanted to mention it.
Because they say cows will lay down before a huge storm or
Oh, yeah.
whatever, and
Mhm.
they think it's because of like the magnetic poles change or whatever.
Yeah.
So they've tried to do experiments where they go and manually change magnetic poles in a
Fields?
field. Yeah,
Okay.
test.
Uh-huh.
Manually. I mean, nothing really happened, I guess, but maybe that wasn't strong enough. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I really don't know what that would have been. So, yeah, okay, so in this, like I said, like we talked about a second ago, this wasn't just only on the ranch, because the Shermans had neighbors who were also cattle ranchers that had cattle being mutilated and killed as well. And one of the ones that really made me creeped the heck out was this one where they said that these couple of cattle had gone missing. They found them a few days later and they were just dead in the pasture, and it appeared to the veterinarian that came to examine them that they had been dropped from a very great distance up in the air, and that is how they were killed. So what the heck picked up thousands of pounds of cow and dropped it into the pasture and killed it? What in the heck is that? So did those get taken because they were missing and then they were found dead like that? I'm like, so something picked them up and then just dropped them? I mean, I just don't understand, but that is the only thing that they could figure out why they were, because their bodies were just shattered. I mean, I just don't know.
I'm just curious as to why it's cattle, you know, because you would think pigs are more.
Well, I think other livestock was affected. And we will tell a story in a little while of the dogs.
Yeah.
So, but I think the cattle thing is just because it's their livelihood, probably. I don't know. It just seems like to tie into what the history would dictate, but I don't know. I mean, we don't really know why it's going on. So again, one day, Terry and Gwen were going around tagging calves. They would weigh them, tag them with the weight, and they noted that there was a strong musk in the air while they were doing this. They didn't know what it was, so they weren't really too concerned, and I'm sure they, at this point, were like too used to bizarre stuff going on at the ranch.
I mean, you could argue that they were just smelling the cows, but
Yeah.
being a cattle rancher, you know what cows smell like, so you're not gonna mistake that for anything else.
They both definitely know what it smells like, so they're saying it was something definitely off from a cow, but it was a strong musk. So they had an unobstructed view of the field. They heard and saw nothing. It was about 45 minutes that they were just kind of making their rounds. They were weighing these calves, tagging them, and everything was fine. All of a sudden, except for this strong musky odor, all of a sudden, one of their dogs that was with them started growling and facing toward the house, and the calf that they had first tagged ran off in the opposite direction. They never saw it again alive. The mother of the calf started running back and forth in a kind of a semicircle, and it was dragging its foot, limping. It was out of breath. She was panting and in distress. They ran over to her, and when they got closer, they realized sickeningly enough, that the calf they had just weighed and tagged only like 40 minutes earlier was dead. It was spread eagle on the ground with all 4 limbs spread out to the sides. Its entire internal body cavity was gone. All of the muscle from the torso was gone. And the ear that they had just tagged had been sliced off, like Shai had said, with precision. It was bizarre. So I don't know that I recommend that you go look at the pictures of this, but I will say that I didn't fully get the full picture of what was going on to some of these cattle until I did see that. And I was like, what the heck is that? If you see this picture, I think I should just say, maybe we should post it. Maybe we would. I don't know if that's too gory. I guess I could post a warning. It is extremely interesting, I will say, but also kind of terrifying. And there was no blood whatsoever at all. No blood on the calf, no blood on the ground, nothing.
Yeah, because there wasn't any blood. And they even did experiments where they actually took blood and poured it onto the ground to see how long it would take to seep. And even 2 days later, there was still noticeable blood, so it wasn't like it just seeped into the soil and disappeared forever.
No, they determined that it had to have been done with machinery similar to like a processing plant type of machine.
Yeah.
Like we said, Terry and Gwen heard nothing, and they were within earshot. It wasn't like this was on a different, completely like opposite end of their property that they couldn't have seen or heard anything if it had gone on. There was nothing that they heard or saw. It's almost like something took it. It had to have essentially taken it off of the property, done this to it, and then dumped it back on the property.
Yeah. There's no way a human could strip an animal like that in that little of time.
Yeah, they would have noticed. They couldn't find any tracks of any sort of car or anything around. So that was another aspect that's like, what in the heck happened here?
Yeah, because they even hired a professional tracker to come out.
Yeah.
And he was like, I can't find anything.
So did something pick this cow up, take it off the property without leaving tracks, remove all its internal organs, drop it on the property. Oh, and the other aspect of this is that they found its femur bone was 10 feet away, and it had been ripped from the ball and socket joint, which is no easy task, even on a calf.
Yeah, it was a femur bone.
That's not something that you can just easily, like, plop right out. So something bizarre went on here with this poor little calf. So in 1970, the federal government created this lake on the Ute land as a kind of a partial payment for them taking water off of their land and to begin with. And it ended up being called Bottle Hollow.
Yeah.
So it's about this Bottle Hollow reservoir.
Reservoir.
Oh, damn. Oh my gosh, we've had to record this twice and I cannot say that word. So, Bottle Hollow Lake, it's a reservoir. Okay, I'm not going to say it. Covers 420 acres and it almost directly abuts Skinwalker Ranch, so it's right off Skinwalker Ranch. And the Utes have long believed that this lake is inhabited by one or more large aquatic serpents, and that there are countless sightings by locals and tribe members alike, dating back to the very first days of this lake. Kelleher and Knapp spoke with numerous witnesses, some who were retired police, others who simply wanted to remain anonymous and wanted zero public attention from their stories whatsoever. One of the tribal police told them that we used to see things crawling around in the water that looked like giant snakes, going from one end to the other. You could see it on moonlit nights. And I know this kind of sounds a bit wacky. I'll be honest, I totally admit, but it's something that has been seen and reported so many times, and that they looked into this and interviewed so many people, and they all had these similar stories. And some of this that I'm about to tell you is going to also tie in big time to stuff that goes on the ranch itself. So the tribal police say that there have been an inordinate amount of drownings in Bottle Hollow over the years. One of the cases that they investigated was of a Ute woman and man who were both swimming at night. The woman began screaming. She was saying something was grabbing her and pulling her under the water. Her companion said he dove under and grappled with a huge snake before he was able to free her from its clutches, but she was dead by the time he got her to the surface. And there were multiple witnesses there that night that supported these claims, to the point that the police took this very seriously. So again, it's not like there's just some crackheads running around talking about like some crazy story that nobody believes, nobody, that they're just crazy and they're imagining stuff. There are multiple people that see these things multiple times. I mean, it just keeps happening. So,
I mean, these people clearly aren't just like seeking fame and fortune either, because they still don't have it. They're not living in some Hollywood mansion now. So like, why would they? There's no gain here.
There really isn't. Other than a lot of them feel almost ashamed.
Yeah.
Like they're crazy. As I think anybody that experiences stuff like this tend to think, because as a society, we don't really embrace that kind of those aspects of like more paranormal activity types things. And I don't mean, when I say paranormal, I don't mean like the movie's Paranormal Activity. I'm talking about, events that we can't explain with current scientific methods. So, yeah, I mean, even the people that wrote this book, that made the documentary, they're not rolling in dough either. This is not a money-making scheme. This is legit. The Shermans themselves were their lives were completely wrecked for the 18 to 20 months that they lived on the ranch. They were visibly just wrecked. They didn't sleep. They were so stressed out. They were losing a ton of money.
Yeah.
They had 80 head of cattle in that year, or a year and a half or so that they lived there, and they lost 14 of those cattle, which is a crazy amount for them to be losing. They were like thousands of dollars each, and that was a devastating blow to them financially, on top of the emotional turmoil and stress that it caused them.
Well, and because like 80 head of cattle really isn't that much.
No.
So to lose even a couple would be, pretty disheartening.
Yeah, and he really prided himself on his,
Yeah, and like people just assume because you raise animals for like beef cattle that you just are unattached to them and you're just making money. But like, these farmers, they get really attached to their animals and they want the best and utmost care for them. And to like, when one dies in natural causes, that's one thing, or like cold or whatever, but to see the way these animals were brutalized, it's heartbreaking,
right. And he was extremely, they were all very upset by this, because they were attached, like you said, they were attached to them no matter what was going to be the
outcome.
They cared about them immensely. So there are also many accounts of strange lights entering and leaving the waters. And, let's keep this in mind, because we'll talk about some of these stories in a little while. A police officer told Knapp and Kelleher that he saw a large light plunge into the center of the lake and then quickly exit before flying away into the night sky. They also interviewed 4 other men who said that they had recently been on the beach with dates when a blue light ball flew from the direction of the Sherman Ranch, which is absolute, just keep paying attention, everyone. It dove into the water a few feet from the shore and emerged seconds later. When it emerged, it was no longer a globe shape and had transformed into some sort of shimmering, maneuverable belt-shaped shaft of light. After dancing around in the sky momentarily, it zipped away at a high rate of speed, hugging the ground before disappearing past Skinwalker Ridge. These people didn't want any attention from this, but all 4 of them had the same story. And I believe they checked with their dates as well. And they also could concur with this story of this bizarre light moving in and out of the lake and coming from the direction of the Sherman Ranch, which, at the outset, that doesn't seem that frightening, I guess. Like, just some light, but let's hear what that light does before we jump to any conclusions in that regard, because there's some scary stuff that happens on the ranch with that light. Last episode, you had mentioned about how Gwen had seen that wolf thing by her car that was like as tall as her vehicle, and that it was accompanied by some little dog companion. They had been initially thinking maybe we're delusional, like maybe we're just crazy and this is not going on. But after after she saw that second sighting, she was like kind of angry because she thought that maybe somebody in the Ute tribe had a wolf as a pet, and they had been like crossbreeding them with some other animal for a while, and that's why she couldn't recognize whatever they were seeing. So she went to the tribal office to complain, and everybody kind of met her complaints with blank stares and told her that nobody in the community owned wolves and that they hadn't seen wolves in the region since 1930. Maybe she'd seen a coyote, which I think we can all agree is not the description.
Yeah, they're significantly smaller than wolves.
Right. Like Shai said last episode, that animal had to bend down to her window to breathe on the glass because she saw it fog it up. So she thinks it's like 4 times the size of any wolf she'd ever seen or heard of in her life. So definitely not a coyote because, I mean, most coyotes you see are pretty scrawny little, like they can do some damage in a pack, but they're not towering to, over your vehicle. So the family saw the giant creatures off in the distance multiple more times following that initial sighting, and then it seemed to completely disappear off the face of the earth. And so I'm sure they were like, woo, good, glad to get that gone. But unfortunately, then a whole bunch of other creepy crap started happening. So Gwen liked to walk around the property, which you can along the ridge, which I think we could all understand. It seems like the property would be really beautiful and amazing if only it wasn't
creepy.
Creepy as hell. So she was walking around and she felt something huge like rush past her near her pretty close. Where it like blew her hair. She actually ducked to miss so that it wouldn't hit her. And she couldn't see anything at all, and it made no noise whatsoever, but she felt that big rush of wind go past. It happened again a couple of minutes later, and it was closer that time, and she said the sun was setting, and she should have been able to see anything that would have gone past her, but she did not see a thing. So she was extremely creeped out, of course. I mean, what the hell? And she decided to go back home, and that was just it for the time being. So she was just like, oh, well, I don't know what that was. So that was like the first encounter that she had outside with something that we will begin to flesh out a little bit more. So after this, she went home and she decided not to tell anybody. So she didn't tell Terry, didn't tell the kids. She was just like, I'm going to keep this to myself, because she started to kind of question her sanity for a while. Because back at the house, things started happening where she would be like stirring up some cookies or some bread, and she'd go outside to check on something, and she'd come back inside and her mixing spoon would be gone. There were various things that happened where things would be misplaced, and she was like, and she couldn't find them anywhere. And then they would like turn up in the freezer or something like a day later. So that really freaked her out. But she was starting to think that the kids were playing tricks on her or something, I guess is what she was trying to tell herself. And then one night, Terry stormed into the house furious, and he was asking who had hidden his post hole digger, which is like a 70-pound tool.
Yeah.
That he was using to fix a fence. So he went to go get a wrench out of his truck. When he came back to the fence where he had, like, just nearby, and when he came back to the fence, his posthole digger was gone. He stormed in the house furious. He was like, who took my posthole digger? He thought one of his kids did something, hit it, but they were all in the house. Gwen said, we've all been in the house this whole time. They all went outside to search for it, and after like 30, 45 minutes, they gave up because they couldn't find it anywhere, and he was pissed all night long. He didn't know what happened, but he was furious, and he was really mad because it was nighttime, it was getting dark, and he had a broken fence that he needed to mend, but he totally couldn't without this post-hole digger. Weeks later, he walked outside one night, and this post-hole digger was 20 feet up in a tree. So the 70-pound tool that he was using that completely disappeared, they looked everywhere for it, was suddenly sitting 20 feet up in a tree.
I mean,
Just take that.
I grew. I've used them before. We have one here now. They're not light. They're awkward.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're not just going to hook it up into a tree.
No. So, yeah, put that in your pipe and smoke it, people. What in the heck? The same thing happened with a pair of pliers that he was using to mend a fence a couple weeks later. It was just, things were just starting to go missing unexplainably. And it was then that Gwen finally decided to come clean, I guess you would say, and say, listen, this stuff has been happening to me in the house for a while. So, what the heck is that? I'm not sure.
So, speaking of like missing and moved objects here, even piles of wood, like cut up firewood, they would, cut the wood, put it in a pile, and then move it, for either access or whatnot. But the next day or what have you, it would be put like in the exact same spot.
Right.
It was beforehand. And like, that's so frustrating because moving wood is a tedious task. And just who has the time to do that? And it's noisy too. I mean, unless you're like, very delicately placing each piece, but just like things like that would even be happening.
And I think they even said that Terry's son had been moving the wood one day, and he left for maybe an hour and it had been moved back to the original spot, but he was like, there was no way that you would be able to move it in that short of amount of time without maybe a vehicle or something, but yet there was never any tracks of any vehicles or anything like that would have made this job any easier. And there were no footprints or anything like that. So it was just like, what the hell? Truly. So now let's move on to some unidentified flying objects type thing. So we have a few different categories of these at the ranch. There's the actual vehicle type unidentified flying objects that we'll start talking about, and then we'll get into some of these like orbs and lights that they saw. So the first event where they actually saw a vehicle on their property was one evening when Terry, his son, and his nephew, who had come to stay for the summer, they were going out on the property to check the cattle, which he did regularly. Like we said, Terry was he took the cattle ranching extremely seriously. He was always trying to make sure his cattle were okay. And so on the ranch, it was like a double duty job because they were under attack by some invisible force, it seemed. So he was out like in snowstorms, rainstorms, everything, trying to make sure his cattle were okay. And there were times where he could not really help it. But they were out one night checking on the cattle, and in the distance, he saw what he assumed to be the lights of an RV that was trespassing on his land. He had seen some weird lights like this previously one night, but he kind of brushed it off, thinking it was maybe just some hunters or something. But on this night, he wanted to get these people off his land. So they all three began to hurriedly make their way over to this RV. And when they were about 200 yards away, it began to move away from them. And he was kind of puzzled at how it even saw them, but they continued to try to catch it. And they thought, well, there's only one entrance into this whole property, and they're not going to be able to get away. So they began to run towards it. He didn't want him to try to break through any fence line to get away from them, so he was trying to catch up. They noticed that the front lights of the RV and the red backlights were all very smoothly moving along, not jumping along on the road like you would expect when there's bumps and holes in the ground. It's not like a smooth paved
Is this
surface.
like the refrigerator type looking one?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, they were saying it was just cutting through the trees.
Yeah, well, and you would expect, if it's actually an RV, like they thought, that if it's on the ground, its lights are going to be bouncing around. That's just basic.
Well, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But they weren't. They were going smooth as heck, just going along. All of a sudden, they rose a few feet higher than they had been, and all three of them were like, what the heck is going on? And they realized it was elevating itself over fence lines. Essentially, it was hopping over fences. Still, they were like, maybe this is still a vehicle that we have heard of in our lives. So they continued to chase it. It was nearing the edge of the pasture that was lined in thick olive trees. So Terry was like, well, we've got them now. They're not going to be able to get through those. And the other part of that is he couldn't hear a thing. Okay.
Yeah, it was like completely silent.
Yeah, the closer they got.
Yeah, and like that's the thing about all these vehicles is they're silent.
Right. Which is not normal. I mean, you hear every car, especially plane or
Yeah.
In any vehicle, you hear it. Okay, so they continue to follow these red lights, and he was expecting them to slow as they reached the olive trees. The two boys were a bit of a ways ahead of him, and he heard them loudly gasp, and it was at this point that the RV started to climb even higher to the point where it was going over the tree line, which was over 50 feet high. So as it crested the tree line, they were all able to clearly see the silhouette of the vehicle they were chasing, and it was not an RV. It was an object that was oblong, like a long refrigerator, and it flew smoothly over the trees and away from them. There was one white light that was in the front and one red light in the back. So, what the heck was that? His nephew was 14 and was freaking shook. He was like crying. He wanted to go home. He thought, okay, well, my son's a little bit more seasoned to this kind of stuff, but he was also like, Dad, what was that? Like, what was that? And he couldn't tell you. He thought maybe it was a military exercise, but he didn't really understand why they would be on his private property or what they were doing there.
Well, it's weird because of like the cattle mutilation and like the way it was presented to them and the brutality behind it, and then like these strange vehicle instances. Like they were one of the theories was if it is the government, they likened it to psychological warfare.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to just shock and scare whoever is on this property. And I'm like, well, if that's true, like what's the point? Mm-hmm. What are they trying to prove here? Like, are they like, I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't know either. And maybe it is psychological warfare, but not from the government. I don't know. Right. Maybe it's both. Who knows? We really don't know. We'll get into theories next episode, but I'm like, our little pea brains can't comprehend this. I don't know what we're going to come up with. But anyway. Yeah, his nephew went home shortly after, and his parents told him that they would not be coming back ever again. So the ranch was now known among his family as being off limits, I guess. A few weeks later, both Terry and Gwen went for a nighttime walk around their property when they encountered this refrigerator-like craft again.
I would not be upset if this fridge had snacks. Do ya or don't ya?
A flying refrigerator dropping snacks on
not mad.
Your property. They first heard a metallic noise, then they saw the lights in the distance and the shape of the craft as they got closer. As they got closer to it, it again lifted off the ground and began to silently and smoothly move away from them. It was at this time that Terry thought, who the hell do they think they are? He was starting to get kind of pissed off. He was starting to feel like some jerk had come on his property, was mutilating his cattle, was like playing tricks on them, was trespassing, was damaging stuff. Like, what is this? He was starting to get furious. But the RV disappeared into the night. It was like the night just swallowed it up, which seems to be kind of what happens with a lot of these little flying crafts, is that they'll follow them for a while and then they just kind of disappear into the night.
Yeah.
I don't know where they're going. So it was around this time that they began to hear rumors around town that their property was cursed land and that no Native American would ever step foot on their property, but they couldn't get a straight answer why. I'll tell you why. Well, I don't really know. I'm just kidding. I have no idea. Some stories in the area, again, these are around the ranch, but not at the ranch, were of a highway patrolman who told Kelleher and Knapp of two separate encounters that he had with some sort of creature out on a stretch of highway. His first encounter, he said, the being seemed to wear a ghastly mask as it kept pace with his patrol car, and he thought it had attached itself to his door handle, but he was freaking horrified to realize that it was running alongside his vehicle as he was going like over 60 miles an hour. And like I said, wearing a ghastly mask, which I'm like, no, thanks, dude.
I would have literally peed all over.
That scares the crap out of me. I have always had some sort of weird fear of being on a road, a kind of desolate road, and you think you're okay because you're in your car, but this thing apparently can run alongside you. He said he had a nearly identical encounter a few days later where he was absolutely like shaken to the core, and though he started to try to tell himself he was delusional or something, because that's what everybody tries to do at first. A few weeks later, he was having coffee with a fellow patrolman, and he couldn't help but tell this other patrolman his story. To his surprise, the other patrolman admitted that he had a very similar encounter with a white-faced ghoul that appeared out of nowhere and kept pace with his car as he sped across the desert. Like, no.
I would have just crashed my car and been like, nope, bye.
I mean, that would be... So in a similar vein, there was a family who told Knapp and Kelleher a very similar story of their experience in 1983 as they drove along a highway in the massive Navajo reservation on Highway 163 one night. And all 4 family members felt like someone was following them while they were driving. When they slowed to round a turn, they all claimed that the atmosphere changed and time seemed to slow down. Then something leapt out of a ditch on the side of the road at them. They all described it as being black and hairy. It was eye level with the cab, and that it wore man's clothing. Okay. I'm like, I don't know what that would be. They described it as a white and blue checkered shirt and long pants, that the thing's arms were raised over its head and they were almost touching the top of the car. They said that it looked like a hairy man or a hairy animal, but it did not look like an ape, that the eyes were yellow and its mouth was open. Now, the father, he had served 2 tours in Vietnam. He was a tough old dude, but he said he was white as a ghost and he got goosebumps all over his body whenever he saw this. Although at the time seemed to stand still, they ended up being miles down the road eventually and kind of came out of a fog, I guess. And a few days later, they were at their home, which was in Flagstaff, Arizona, and the family was all woken up by loud drumming. They looked outside to see 3 quote-unquote men outside their fence that were simply shadowy beings, and they looked like they were trying to climb the fence but seemed inexplicably unable to do so, like they couldn't come onto their property. Frustrated by the failure of their attempt, the men began to chant loudly at the fence line while the family huddled, terrified, in the house. So I just got chills in a room that is probably 98 degrees with 90% humidity because that creeps me out. So I don't know. Again, I'm not saying this was not on the ranch, but it was in the surrounding area. And it's just another thing to add to this bizarro list of experiences. Now, the younger girl of the family, she did have a friend who was a Navajo Indian who came to the house. She looked around. I mean, this is really just, whatever. But she had said that she thought maybe those were skinwalkers and that they knew the family had some sort of power or something and they wanted that power, but there was something protecting the house that they couldn't get in. I don't really know. Either way, that still was something bizarre that happened, and it went home with them again. So I feel like pretty much don't go to the desert because there's something going on. Just avoid all the deserts altogether. To kind of go back to some of the sightings of like dog beings, giant wolf people. There is a security officer for the Ute tribe that told Kelleher and Knapp of one evening that he was working a night shift and he realized that his 2 dogs were staring intently out the window but not making a peep. They were like frozen. And when he looked out the window, he saw that there was a figure on the patio that instantly made him have goosebumps and his hair stand on end. It was some big old weird dog creature. And when the thing realized he saw it, it quickly bounded over a wall and was gone. But he said he immediately went outside, and after it was gone, he said you could still smell the strong odor that it left behind. He said the thing was huge, and although he had been using his flashlight immediately before spotting it, he was unable to turn the flashlight on when he tried to do so to illuminate this wolf person. He said it moved very quick and was something he'd never seen before, but knows it was there because it knocked over a ton of trash cans as it ran from him, and also all the dogs that were in the area were like going crazy whenever it passed. So him and his partner kind of went that direction to follow it afterwards, and there were trash cans just all over the place, and all the dogs were just like going ballistic. So something went through there that he saw that was not normal. And a few nights later, he was patrolling a back road with another officer when they came into an opening at a pasture, and there again he saw this hairy, huge black creature. He said when it turned to look at him, both of its eyes were huge and red. So there's whatever that is. There's another. The black hairy...
It's your ex-husband! Ah! It's interesting, because all the creatures that are seen are canine type creatures, right? And of course, everybody knows, like in Indian folklore, coyotes are prominent and known as like the tricksters. And they said like it felt like someone was constantly tricking them.
Right.
Yeah, just playing a joke.
And that's kind of like a skinwalker too. They say that skinwalkers can kind of be tricksters, but they're just evil about it. But it's also weird, but we haven't gone into yet, but it is also weird that they would hurt the other dogs too. But I guess not. I don't know. I mean,
I wouldn't think so. I don't think they're like subjective to just, if something's in their way, they're going to get rid of it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So back on the ranch, one night, Terry was out looking around and he saw what looked like a miniature stealth fighter jet. It was black and just like miniature size, flying around, and it was projecting multicolored disco lights onto the snow. And it was completely silent. He couldn't see the multicolored lights were coming from, but they were being projected down onto the snow.
It just wants to party.
I mean, seriously, like, what the hell is that? I mean, that just sounds ridiculous. Whenever he stretched out a little bit and his knee cracked, and the thing immediately turned its lights off and kind of pivoted to face him and then completely flew away. And a few weeks later, Gwen was at the ranch alone while Terry was out of town for the night and the kids were staying with friends. She closed the gate and was driving down the dirt road toward the house when she realized that there was a black stealth fighter looking aircraft hovering over her car, keeping pace with her, and that there were multicolored lights being projected onto the ground from it. So this was unrelated to Terry's incident, and he had not told her of this. So she quickly went to the house, tried to forget about it, ate dinner. She was trying to get through this night without anybody being in the house, but she was freaking terrified about it. And she looked out the window and realized that there was what appeared to be an RV parked merely 200 yards away from the house on the property. And she was super confused about what they would be doing there and how they got there without taking the only entrance which would have taken them by the house, and she had seen nobody. She said that the interior of the vehicle was brightly lit and that there was what appeared to be a desk inside of it. At one point, a dark figure came and sat behind the desk, dressed in black and wearing some sort of headgear. Suddenly, the figure stood up and went to what appeared to be a light-filled doorway. She said if it was a normal RV doorway, the figure had to have been 7 feet tall. It was dressed in all black with a black visor over its face, and it had black knee-high boots on.
So are we talking about like Men in Black here?
Dude,
because
I don't know. I have no
those
idea.
Are pretty, and those have you said to have been humanoid-like, but not human. Like they can't quite get like human mannerisms and behaviors down, so they're a little awkward. So
right, it's like a skinwalker but with humans, essentially. Now get this, everybody. She said the figure seemed to be staring directly at her, which would make me about die. She closed the blinds and she called Terry, asking him to come home immediately. He was hours away but drove all night long to get there because he heard how terrified she was. And the next morning they both went out to inspect the area where the RV had been, and they saw enormous footprints in the mud. They measured over 18 inches long.
Question though.
Yeah.
Would you not call the authorities in this instance?
I don't know. That is a curious thing.
Unless you're so terrified.
Yeah, that's a good. I mean, that's a good question. That why didn't she call the police? When that happened. Good question.
I don't know. Maybe you're just so worried about sounding so psycho. I don't know.
Maybe,
but I still would have. Yeah,
if there's something and you're actually seeing like a person type thing, I would definitely be like, hello.
The only thing I can think of is, we've heard stories about alien encounters and how they kind of mind control. Possibly we had some of that going on. I don't know. Paralysis.
Well, that is actually some of the claims that we'll get into, especially once we get into the NIDS group that comes with like actual scientists to study this stuff. While they're not going to have a lot of luck, they definitely did experience some mind control elements. And Terry felt like that there were some times where his emotions and mind were being controlled as well. So I'm sure that probably... I mean, of course, it's an easy way to explain away the fact that she didn't call the police, but it is also possible that that's a good explanation for why. So you brought the question up and you answered it yourself. So well done, Shy.
See?
Yeah, good job.
I can do it.
You can do it. So after that, the Shermans didn't let the kids out at night, and they stopped going for leisurely walks at night anymore.
Well, yeah.
Well, yeah, but unfortunately, he still had to go out and tend to the cattle and check on them. Otherwise, he just felt like he was abandoning them.
Yeah.
It finally, at this point, dawned on them that they were in danger, which is like, yeah, I think.
Oh, now maybe we should worry.
I mean, a couple months ago, whenever you saw that the doors had bolts on them on the inside and outside, might have given you a little clue. So there's a big kind of like a hot spot of these type of crafts in Brazil. They're known as chupas. And
like a chupacabra?
I know, that's what I was thinking, but no, this is what they call the UFOs in Brazil.
Okay.
I thought you were going to say chalupa because that's even closer.
I wish.
A 90s chalupa, not a 2018 chalupa.
Taco Bell is literally like a trash can now. Like if you want Taco Bell, just go get some food from your dumpster because that's all it is.
We'll definitely not get Taco Bell sponsors now, but
I don't want it.
Yeah. If we could get a time machine to take us back to 1996.
90s Taco Bell was
90s Taco Bell.
Amazing.
Legit. So a scientist named Jacques Vallée wrote a book called Confrontations, A Scientist's Search for Alien Contact, where he went into South America to interview people claiming to have these experiences with these chupas and investigate their claims further. He spoke to a doctor that was in charge of a health unit on this island where there had been some sightings, and that doctor said that he had seen no fewer than 35 patients claiming injuries that were related to these chupas. Witnesses claimed they saw intense, blinding light beams like electrical arcs with pulsating colors and a foul smell. They all suffered lesions similar to radiation injuries to their face and their thoracic area. So the injuries, they started with intense reddening of the skin and in the affected area, and then the hair would fall out and the skin would turn black. There was not any pain associated with it, but it would be slightly warm to them and to the touch. He compiled a comprehensive list of symptoms that people who experienced these chupas had, and they were feeling weak, some could hardly walk, dizziness and headaches, numbness and trembling, a pallid complexion, low arterial pressure, anemia, blackened skin where the light hit it with several red-purple circles that were hot and painful, 2 to 3 centimeters in diameter. Some of these I'm like, why? 2 puncture marks inside red circles resembling mosquito bites that were hard to the touch. Are those what you have on your head?
Oh my, you know what? That is very strange. Because they are.
Okay. Really?
Yeah, they're not like solid, but they're hard to the touch.
Oh, but the hair and the black... Oh, but they're not black, are they?
No.
Okay. The hair in the blackened area fell out and did not rejuvenate at all, as if the follicles had been destroyed. And there were some people who were killed by these beams, but most of them were not. And the people who survived, most of the symptoms would disappear after 7 days, except for the hair not growing back. After consulting various forensic pathologists, they determined that the light they saw may be ionizing and non-ionizing radiation, though many of the symptoms in Brazil are similar with high-power pulsed microwaves, which those may interfere with central nervous system, and could cause many symptoms described by witnesses. So, okay, I'm bringing this up because this really does relate to some of the things that are happening at the ranch. Also, they have happened all over the western, southwestern, midwestern, and and southern United States, and all over the world. Another one that I wanted to bring up, because it's going to kind of harken back to the ranch, is a story of some people that were about 30 minutes away from where I am now in College Station, Texas. So they were near Houston, and it was a lady who owned a diner, her employee, and her grandson. They were like 2 50-year-old women, and then one of them's grandson. They were on this sparsely populated road on their way home one winter evening when there was a bright light in the road before them, and eventually a large object blocked their path on the road. So they had to come to a stop because this giant aluminum thing was hovering above the road in front of them. They got within 60 feet of it, and it looked to be made of aluminum and glowed so brightly that it lit up the surrounding trees. One of the women described it as a giant diamond of fire because at the bottom of it, it sent out kind of a cone of fire that they said had it not stopped on the road, it would have set the whole forest on fire. She also said that the craft let out an intermittent beeping sound, and she had the impression it was having some sort of mechanical trouble. They were so entranced by the brilliant light that the craft gave off that they all stood outside of the car staring at it for some time, which seems unwise, but okay. I guess, it's one of those things like I don't think you really have full control of your faculties. As the object began to move away, the women went to get back into the car, and they noted that the door handles were so hot that they had to use a leather jacket to open them. And as the three watched the object fly off, they said 23 helicopters came in from every direction, and they were seeming to try and encircle the object, though it had disappeared behind the trees that lined the road. They ended up having to turn the AC on full blast, even though they had the heat on initially, because the car inside of it was so warm from the heat that thing gave off. They drove down the road at 60 miles an hour, and the thing remained in the distance clearly visible as a bright cylinder of light, and it was still lighting up the surrounding area and the helicopters that were around it. Who knows what happened with that thing, but obviously, whatever those helicopters were people that knew this thing was there. So, and I haven't heard a lot of stories about a lot of helicopters surrounding a UFO any time in my history. So it's interesting how these things go on and somehow nobody knows anything about them. Within a few hours, all three became very ill. Their skin turned red, their necks swelled and blisters emerged. The blisters broke on their face, scalp, and eyelids. They were vomiting through the night. They were sick as hell. Now, I don't know why, but they said all three were cared for at one of their homes, but as the conditions began to deteriorate, they were taken to the hospital. One of the ladies' hair began to fall out, and her eyelids were so swollen that she couldn't see for a week. When the doctors examined them, they determined that they'd been exposed to radiation, possibly ionizing UV or IR, but they weren't entirely consistent with those injuries only. That one lady that got the extreme brunt of it, she died of cancer in 1998, which was about 10 years later, and whether that was related to the craft injuries that she incurred is unknown, but the injuries that those three suffered from the exposure that they got was very real and was documented.
Well, that's not the only instance of a person being exposed to this type of light and dying of cancer.
Yeah. Are you talking about that? Who are you talking about?
In the documentary, there's a lady who was like a big skeptic. She was like, no. But she had come in contact with the light, and so did her neighbor, I believe it was, who was a man. Mm-hmm. And she said after that instance happened, I mean, she became like extremely emotional too, talking about it.
Yeah.
Right. And she had said that he would walk up up the road every day and talk to her. And she said his face was just permanently red, and like the burns were so deep, and he just wasn't the same anymore. Mm-hmm. And he eventually died from cancer. And her son as well, he's 30 years old, and then all of a sudden he's diagnosed with MS. Mm-hmm. So
after his exposure to the light, that's a common theme, is like people seeing the brightest light they've ever seen in their life. Shy?
Well, okay, so I have my own experience. So
okay.
And I mean, I don't have radiation. Maybe I do. I don't know. But anyway.
Well, you do have my
bumps.
Antennas, yeah.
So I was driving home one night. I lived in a small farm town, of course. And I was on a country road, and it was the road was in between two fields, and I was with my boyfriend at the time too, and I remember driving, and then all of a sudden we were just like encased in like the brightest blue light. It flooded my car. It was like on the sides of us. It lit up the front of the road, and I'm thinking that there's a helicopter spotlighting me, but we couldn't hear a helicopter. I was looking, up out my window, nothing. He had said, well, maybe there's a spotlight on one of the sprinklers in the field, but like, I don't think it would have followed us for as long as it did, and it wouldn't have been that illuminated. Like, my car, it was dark, like I said, and it was just like so bright inside. And it was just, when I think back to it, it's like, I was almost like, I was super confused, so confused. And then it went away, and I can't even tell you the exact moment it did or even what happened afterwards, but it was just so bizarre. I still can't explain it. And yeah, it was just like massive confusion, and then it just went away, and it was like we never talked about it again.
See, I feel like that's so common in these stories of people saying really dazed and confused for some unknown reason, and it's not even like afterwards you're like, holy crap, did you blah blah blah, like you're just like going about your day, even though the most bizarre thing just happened. Like you never actually saw what it was that was emanating that light.
No. Yeah, and like I don't remember, I don't even think we talked about it when we got back to the house. It was just like, that was weird.
Okay, also, good thing you didn't get out of the car, I guess, because you probably would have had radiation poisoning or something.
This was, the speed limit on this road was probably 45, 50 miles per hour, too. So it's not like we could have just, like, rolled to a quick stop and got out,
So, okay, so you kept driving through it?
Yeah.
Okay, so you never stopped. Yeah. So your car didn't have any electrical issues, though, so that's good.
No.
Okay, well, and the radio didn't cut out, or the light.
If it did, I couldn't tell you.
There are some other tales of people actually it's the Shermans, where it'll make certain things that happen like that will make their lights dim, or something. But anyway.
It was so bright though that I couldn't, even if I didn't have my lights on, my headlights, which I did. But it was like, it wouldn't have made a difference.
Right. So that's super interesting. And the documentary that you're referencing is The Hunt for the Skinwalker. The director, I don't know. The director is Jeremy Corbell, I believe. I thought it was really interesting. So it's on Amazon, and you should check it out if you want to. But it kind of just gives you a better visualization of the ranch and some of the stuff that goes on there and the people involved and everything. Okay, so Shai has probably been visited by a UFO, or you stumbled in this thing, but it's kind of like also how Gwen said that thing followed her car for a while.
Yeah.
That seems like what happened to you as well. So, I don't know. Either way.
Well, and then, okay, so I'll just tell you about my other two.
Yeah.
So in 8th grade, my best friend growing up, we slept out on the trampoline a lot when we had sleepovers. Mm-hmm. And we were laying out there one night, and I just, we noticed, we were just looking up at the sky, and we noticed, a star just started zigzagging across the sky. And then another one started, and eventually there was 5 lights in total coming in and out of view, zigzagging around, just odd patterns, circling. We were just so... again, confused at what was happening. And then I even messaged her yesterday and was like, I'm not crazy, right? Like, that really happened. And she's like, no, I think about it all the time. Like, it still confuses me to this day. And I'm like, okay, so it wasn't just me for sure.
Yeah.
And then, we talked about that a lot afterwards, of course, but we never told a lot of people because, okay, whatever,
right.
Stupid. So... one night, my husband and I were hiking out of a drainage. We just got done hunting, and we were packing out an elk, and it was real late, and it was, out there, it's pitch black. So we're laying there taking a rest. Same thing starts to happen. It's just one this time, but this thing is dipping up and down, moving side to side. And if it's an aircraft, it's like nothing we'd have ever seen.
Right.
And when you're out there in the desert, hungry, starving, exhausted. You're like, am I just loopy? But we both were watching it,
Right.
and it was just like, you can't take your eyes off of it. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
And we don't have an explanation for that either.
Yeah, I mean, and this isn't something that you immediately went into our friendship going, listen to this, like, you know, like,
Yeah.
like, you were even kind of, I think, because I remember when the first time you told me, you weren't real thrilled, it seemed, to tell me. I think I kind of made you tell me because I was like, have you ever had any experiences? And you were like, well,
because you don't want to come off as like a crazy
yeah,
UFO zealot.
right.
You know?
But, you know, even with me, like, so it's not like you're over here, like, dying to tell this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying it was aliens either. It's literally a UFO. It's an unidentified flying object.
Right.
So whatever it is was very bizarre, and I will remember those instances for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I mean, it was whatever it was. The technology is something that we don't know about because something that could fly, like an aircraft cannot fly in those patterns.
Oh,
things.
yeah.
Yeah. So I would love to hear if anybody else has similar or different stories.
For sure.
You know, whatever you have experienced, we would love to hear it. You can email us or give us a message on Facebook or message on the Facebook page, whatever you want to do. Let's hear them because I'm definitely interested to hear it. Maybe that could be maybe one of our October episodes.
Ooh, we can do a listener stories.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. Okay,
cool.
Yes. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Okay. So the most common experience at the Sherman Ranch was they saw this strange orange, otherworldly structure in the sky. All of them, all 4 family members saw it dozens and dozens of times, okay? And when I first read that, I was like, what do you mean? So sometimes this orange giant thing was flattened and elongated, and sometimes it was like the brightest orange setting sun that they said was larger than any harvest moon that they'd ever seen. So essentially a giant, almost perfectly round orange moon that sometimes looked like it was flattened or maybe like you were seeing it from a different angle or something. So Terry would stand on this 4-foot stump that was in their front yard and he would look at this thing with his rifle scope, and he said it always appeared at the same place. In the middle of the mass, it looked like sometimes there was like a hole in the middle and it looked like there was another perfectly blue sky through that hole. So he would be looking at it, it would always appear at night. It would be dark outside, but somehow through the center of this giant orange thing was a different sky, a blue daytime sky.
So like what that makes me think of is, you know, like in, I think it's like the Avengers movies where like the portal opens up and there's like a separate sky. That's what I'm seeing in my mind.
It makes me think about The Gunslinger, which is that novel by Stephen King that he has. It's a series, and in that,
like the Dark Tower.
Yeah, the Dark Tower series.
Okay,
and it's the first book, and there is a part on there where he has that exact same thing happen.
Well, you know what I didn't know is that the Stephen King book.
You're like scratching your forehead. She's waving around a knife. Scratching her forehead with it.
It's my thinking knife.
Okay. Sorry.
This is just a fun fact. I didn't know that like the Stephen King books were encompassed in like one giant alternate realm, and every story has bits of other stories in it. Yeah. Like that's so interesting to me.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I've always loved Stephen King. I was talking about that with my husband. There was always a crow that would talk.
Yeah.
Anyway, on Gunslinger, there's a crow that sings the beans, the magical fruit. And I personally want a crow so badly to just be like my wild companion. Peter thinks I'm such a creep, but I'm like, yes, please. I have to figure out a way to get a crow
to love you.
Yes, I was like, I gotta get lure a crow to be my friend. And he was like, you sound like a crow predator. And I'm like, sorry, I just really want to have a crow friend. And they're very smart, and I just want it so badly. A crow or a magpie, any sort of awesome bird.
It's like my second grade fantasy when they asked me what my dream pet was, and I said a vulture. I was so like, okay.
A giant bird. Oh, Lord. Yeah, but I mean, I agree. I think we've probably talked about this a million times, but I know a crow isn't a bird of prey, but still.
Our dream jobs is a
falconer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whenever I told Peter that, he was like, you are the weirdest person. I was like, no way, man. Like,
how cool would that be?
Awesome. Yeah. I would take it. Like, there's a couple hawks that live in our property, and I'm like, just somebody, please.
Yeah.
You must know how much I love you. Just please, I'll give you something in exchange for your friendship. But anyway, okay. We're talking about the portal in the sky. So one night, Terry was watching this giant orange thing in the sky, and he said it was a window to a whole other world where it was still daylight. So he was like starting to get some ideas in his head about what this may be and what it may mean for his entire property. He said it felt like that there was a tear in the sky to another place or time, and that maybe his property involved different dimensions or alternate realities or things of that nature. And, I think that that's probably the biggest idea that I've had about this whole situation. I mean, not that we're getting into theories right now, but, it just, what in the heck would this hole essentially in the sky be that shows you an entirely different time? Like, what in the heck is going on? So one night, the orange object seemed to kind of have a 3D onion-like appearance. What I kind of took away from that was that it was more like a tunnel, like a portal, and because he was seeing something in the very center. It was a little black object that grew larger and larger, and it essentially was something flying out of this hole, this giant orange globe, towards him, into his world. He said that this globe was only visible in the direction it faced, which was facing always the Sherman house, so that people that were driving from any other direction would only see a faint orange-blue sliver of like a cloud in the sky, that it would look totally normal to anyone, just kind of like a weird anomaly in the sky, unless you were in the Sherman house facing it, in which you saw the full circle of it. So it is like a 3D object that kind of is, the only thing I can think is that it's a portal. Yeah. That you can see head on, but you can't see it from the sides because it's going into a different time completely. I mean, my pea brain, I'm like, my mind is blown here. So aside from his family, cattle, like I kind of have said, cattle were the love of Terry's life. Like, he had an high expertise in raising these high-end cattle that exceeded anyone in the area, and he took it extremely personally if one of them died. He was obsessed with good ranch management, and before they moved here, his cattle had a really, really amazing survival rate. So this was devastating to him, all this stuff that was happening to them. So one night after a snowstorm, he began to round up the cattle to a particular corner of his land when he realized that one of his prized breeding cows could not be found. He spent over 20 hours on horseback searching for her. That seems like a long time.
Yeah, like accumulatively, or like,
I don't know.
In a straight
I don't know.
Your butt would be so sore.
Right, that would be a long time. Maybe it was a cumulative amount of time. But finally, he came across some tracks and realized they were hers. He began to follow them, and because he had some expertise in tracking, he realized that the cow had begun to run by the way the snow was being kicked up around her tracks. It was unusual for a cow to be running around in a snowstorm because they typically will take cover in like some trees and stay there until the storm goes away or abates a bit. So at some point he realized that she began to run at full tilt. As fast as she could go, she was zigzagging through bushes, breaking branches, but her tracks were the only tracks around. There was no other animal tracks around, nothing else. When he rounded a corner and entered a clearing, his breath stopped because the cow ran out into the middle of a field where there was no cover whatsoever, and the tracks just stopped completely in the middle of the field, like she just completely vanished. He looked to see if she could have jumped left or right, if there was anywhere that she could be hidden, but there was absolutely nowhere where she could have gone. He rounded up, he like circled the area for half an hour, avoiding the tracks, trying to figure out what could have possibly happened to this 1,000-pound cow going full speed off the ground. Like, what would have lifted this 1,000-pound cow going full speed off of the ground in the middle of a vicious snowstorm? Can anybody tell me a good theory? He wondered, did it pass through some kind of door? Whatever happened to her, that poor cow, he never saw her again. And over the next 4 months, another 4 cattle disappeared completely, never to be seen again. A really horrible, like, this one made me feel super sad story. And we're coming to the end of the cattle stories, I promise. There was a heavy rainstorm, and Terry and his son were on horseback tracking and wrangling the cattle. His son was going after a calf that had begun to run wildly when he passed a heifer who was stuck in a muddy canal and could not get the footing to get out. He made a mental note to go back and get her after catching the calf, and when he finally returned 20 minutes later, okay, he was horrified to see that she was lying dead in the canal. The water wasn't deep enough for her to drown, so he was confused and dismounted from his horse. He was even more horrified to discover that the cow's entire rear end had been removed with seeming precision cuts, and it was as if a vacuum had come and sucked out her entire insides, and there wasn't a drop of blood anywhere. So when he initially had passed this cow, she was like screaming. He was like, why is she so distressed? Like, obviously it's stressful to not be able to get out of that canal, but it seemed, she seemed like unnaturally distressed. And he said, I swear I saw her alive only 20 minutes ago. What the butt is going on there? And, I mean, for real. Like, that is not the first or last time that the entire rear end of the cattle is gone.
Yeah, that would take a lot of hacking to do. And then, to pack that out, that's a lot of weight.
And a lot of blood that is seeming to disappear. I mean... no one person or even a couple people, I don't know.
It
would take a team of people. I mean, I don't even know if a team of people could actually do that in that amount of time without being seen by these people who are sitting out in their field. Like, it's insane. So, okay, blah. That's it for the cows, the poor cow stories. Well, it's not quite. So one morning, after seeing flashing lights flying low around his cattle the night before, which he saw all the time, so he couldn't always go out immediately and try to defend whatever invisible thing is hurting them. He found another mutilated cow out in the pasture after this flying light incident. Well, the cow was 4 years old, and its reproductive organs in its rear end had been carved out, and both of its ears had been removed with precision. Ugh. Next to the cow's head, there was a pool of brown, shiny liquid that seemed to be quickly evaporating. He said it had a chemical odor, and he got it in between his fingers and said it was a thin, gel-like substance.
Ew, why would you touch it?
I don't know. I guess he just did.
Don't touch it.
He wanted to collect a sample and test it, and for a second I was like, he put it in his mouth? There was something I was watching where they always just taste it. I can't remember, and it's like gross blood, and they do that, but it's like a joke. But anyway, so he ran to the house. He got a jar. He ran back over, and when he returned, it was completely gone already. In a few minutes' time. Whatever it was, I have no idea. There are incidents of blob-like substances appearing out of nowhere and being related to lots of different paranormal things. I have no idea what it could have been, but it was something. Yet, he couldn't do anything to get it tested. Okay, so several more mutilations occurred, and the perpetrators always seemed to want to carry out the mutilations in terrible thunder and lightning storms or like snowstorms. There was always like storms related to these incidents. And I'm sorry, everybody, I don't care. I'm bringing it up again. In Missing 411, After somebody goes disappeared, there's always a storm. Always. Like, every single time. I don't know if maybe it's just because it's in the mountains and I know there's a frequent, a storm situation, but here it's the desert, so I don't really know if there's frequent storms in the desert.
That's an interesting pattern to notice, though.
Yeah,
so.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Weird. I mean, there's a lot of electrical charge. That's all I can. But the other aspect of that is what machinery works really, in aircraft for that matter, works well in storms? None. So our aircraft and our technology, electronic stuff, does not do well in that kind of environment. But maybe it's perfect for opening portals. I don't know. So cattle mutilations have been going on and documented for over 50 years now across the entire West, Midwest, like I said, southern areas of the United States. And not one single person has ever been arrested for any of them. This is a long-standing issue. Never once has anyone been arrested. Just that alone is a little bit sketchy.
Well, there was no ever like any suspects. Like they couldn't pinpoint who it possibly could even be.
How is that?
This isn't a populated city. There's not a lot of people to pick from.
Seems really weird to me. This is a serious problem. There was a lot of stuff that went on because like this goes on and devastates ranchers all over the country. It's a big deal, but somehow we've never even figured out even a suspect for even one of them.
Yeah.
What? Okay. We're moving on to orbs here now, so we're going to move on from the cattle mutilation. So one summer evening, Terry and Gwen noticed that their cattle and horses that they could see from the kitchen were restless. Then Terry saw a blue orb flying along the tree line beside the horses. It swarmed over one in particular, which the horse itself tried to shake it off, almost like it was trying to shake off some flies that were flying around it. And it illuminated the horse in an eerie bright blue glow. They said that the exterior of this orb was a clear, hard shell like glass, and it was 2 to 3 times the size of a baseball. Inside the glass substance was a swirling blue liquid-like substance. What? He could also hear faint crackling like static electricity. So they were actually outside whenever this happened, and he could hear it too. So it was crackling as it flew around. So he said he felt paralyzed with an intense fear unlike anything he'd ever known. Like he'd been trapped with animals before and almost died. And he said never before had he felt fear like he did with this little orb that was flying around. Gwen felt the same, and she began to hyperventilate, and she gasped deeply, and her body began to shake. And Terry felt like he was going to have a seizure. Whether this was because of something that was emanating or because their minds were being controlled by this thing or being affected by this thing, I don't know. So suddenly Gwen turned on her flashlight and she tried to turn it onto the orb, and it immediately and skillfully flew off, darting through the branches easily, seeming intent on getting away from the light. Terry was pretty frightened by the fact that this orb seemed to deliberately manipulate his emotions. So later that evening, as they sat in the living room recovering from this incident, the bright blue orb suddenly appeared, flying lazily past a window. And when it did this, the lights in the house dimmed as it passed, and then once it got a certain amount of distance away, the lights went back up. They said it was almost like their lights were on a dimmer, but they were not. So that's weird. But
well, that happens when I use my microwave.
Your lights dim?
Yeah, and then once it stops, they go back to the normal brightness. So
well, they say that some of these could be microwaves, and maybe it's drawing energy from their energy, their power, or their electricity.
Yeah.
So the rumors about the ranch began circulating around town, and the Shermans were not happy about that. Like we said, they weren't trying to tell everybody in sight what was going on. They were very selective about who they told, but when stuff like this is going on, it's hard to keep it quiet. And there were also people that would come to help work on the ranch that would experience stuff and then take those stories off the ranch and tell other people. So, they had moved to this ranch to be isolated away from, small town gossip and everything else that they had lived in New Mexico, and now it seemed like they were under attack in their own property, and now everybody in town was starting to hear about it. So one evening, a long blonde-haired man drove onto the property in a van, claiming he had heard stories about the ranch and had driven a long way to visit it. This is the guy I mentioned last week that, Terry was like, God, why are you on my property? Like, get off my property. And the guy was like, please, I drove forever and I want to meditate, please. He was begging them to let him meditate on their property. He saw that his son was amused at this man's request, and he was half amused himself, so he finally relented and allowed the man to come onto his property. But he told him, I'm going to drive you out to a certain place, wherever you want to go, and I'm going to stay there with you.
Yeah.
And so they did. He drove to a certain point where the man told him to stop, which was like a little small pasture surrounded by trees, and he said he would meditate here. So the man walked about 100 yards from the tree line, and Terry walked about halfway with him, watching as the man stood and began to hold his arms up and out, like kind of like a saint in a painting, in a vaguely religious kind of stance. In the distance, Terry heard the sound of a cowbell, which puzzled him because none of his cows had bells. The blonde man didn't even seem to hear this noise, even though to Terry it seemed to be coming from deep within the trees. It continued, sounding nearer, and again the blonde man did not seem to hear this bell. Terry's son also heard it, and he gave Terry a puzzled look, and Terry looked into the trees thinking that he could see a faint blur, like something was moving quickly between the trees. He couldn't make out the shape exactly, but he knew it was big, and it seemed almost like it was circling them. And he wondered if it was what was making the cowbell noise, but he did begin to feel incredibly uneasy. Suddenly, the blur broke from the tree line and moved swiftly towards the meditating man. Terry still could not see what it was, even though it was broad daylight. It was blurred, like it was in the middle of heat distortion, and it was moving incredibly, terrifyingly fast. Somehow, it was bearing down on the meditating man, and he had no clue whatsoever. I'm like, was this guy just high as heck? And I don't know, or maybe he didn't hear it at all. I have no idea. Terry was about to yell a warning, but it was too late because the shimmering wraith-like thing had stopped directly in front of the man and let out a huge animal-like roar that echoed through the entire property. Terry, his son, and the man, they all described it as being something like half lion, half bear noise. The stranger leapt back about 10 feet and fell down screaming. And as fast as it had approached him, the shimmering creature darted back to the trees, and Terry could only make out a blur of pixelated blocks. The stranger was still on the ground, screaming hysterically. Terry ran over to check the man for injuries, and the man threw his arms around him, sobbing like a baby. After a while, Terry tried to get the man off of him, but he would not let go. He would not let go, and he was clearly just freaking scared out of his wits. He eventually had to tell the man to let go of him or he was going to hit him, and he finally did, but he said he would only let go if he promised to take him to his vehicle, which obviously Terry was happy to oblige. The stranger said the place was cursed and he would never set foot on it again, which I'm like, okay, dude, I don't think he ever invited you here, but whatever. The man drove off of the property at a dangerously fast speed and was freaking scared out of his wits, like I said. Terry and his son watched the movie Predator a few months later, and they both, whenever the Predator came on screen, I know it sounds crazy, but they would exclaim that it was exactly like what they had seen that day. That it, and I think we've all seen the Predator movie.
Yeah.
That it looks essentially like when you see heat rising off the road or something, like it's just blurred out, whatever, camouflaged. I don't know.
It's like when you're walking in a hot area even, and you think you see like waves or whatever. Yeah.
So I don't know why that would be. And then part of me is always like, I feel like when they make movies about that stuff, there's always like some, and this is wackadoo, but I'm like, there's some element of truth in it. And so maybe somebody has seen something like this before. Either way, Terry calculated he thought the thing had to be moving at 50 to 60 miles per hour in his estimates. And so that's fast as heck. The last story of experiences on the ranch, it was really the last straw for Terry, was that the family had 3 healers that were loyal, and they were sweet as heck with the family, but they were ruthless with strangers. They were super aggressive cattle dogs that were ready to defend their prized cattle with their lives against the threats that were typically posed to them, like coyotes, raccoons, wild dogs, etc. I don't know if they were too prepared for what they were going to encounter on the ranch, but Terry loved these dogs. You know, they provided him a great service in his cattle ranching, and they were just loyal companions on top of that. So one night, he saw that typical orange globe off in the distance, which at this point didn't particularly frighten him because it was there regularly. It wasn't until he noticed a bright blue flash of light at the end of the pasture that he began to stiffen, and the 3 dogs began a low growl. He saw it again, and it was now 300 yards away, moving swiftly between the trees, only about 10 feet off the ground, which is kind of similar to what some of the other orbs that they'd seen did. Then it began to fly in Terry's direction. As he got a more clear look at it, he saw that it was a perfectly circular blue orb, bigger than a baseball and capable of very sophisticated maneuvers. So it was moving in a way that he had not seen any sort of vehicle or aircraft move. The dogs were barking at it now, and the object began to change directions many times and very swiftly. Without thinking, he set his dogs loose, and they began to chase the orb at top speed. At first, it didn't seem to react to the dog's presence until they were super close to it, and then it began to dip down only a foot or so off the ground, and the dogs would jump and snarl at it and bite at it, and it would jerk out of the way at the last minute.
So what you're saying is it was almost like taunting the dogs, like it knew it wasn't gonna get hurt, so it was like, why not?
Just teasing them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, why did he let these dogs go?
I know. I'd been like, nope, you're not going after it. I'm not going after it.
I know. Yeah, we'll let it be. But so fair warning, everyone. This is some poor dogs are getting it. So Terry grew increasingly uneasy as this played out, because it seemed as though this orb was leading the dogs to a thick grouping of trees, drawing them towards the cover of the trees. It flew low and slow, and the dogs chased it into the trees. It was then that Terry heard a noise that chilled him to the bone, which was the unmistakable fear-filled yelps of dogs in mortal agony.
Ugh.
And then after that terrible noise for a few, moments, it became eerily silent, and he waited for his dogs to return, but after a couple of hours, they did not return, and he went to the house with a heavy heart. He couldn't bring himself to go over into the woods until the morning, and I don't blame him.
Yeah.
I would probably be afraid to do it even in the morning, but he did, and his worst fears came true when he went down to the heavy trees, and the smell of burned flesh was overwhelming to him. 10 yards inside of the forest was a small clearing, and 3 large circles of brown, dried-out grass were in the middle of it. At the center of each brown circle was a blackish, greasy mess, and the smell of incinerated dog was nauseating to him. Tears filled his eyes, and he ran from the trees. I think, sick to his stomach. Obviously, that would be absolutely horrendous. What in the world would have done? It's like the dogs were just zapped by something and melted into the ground and killed the grass there in those circles. And I know that weeks later, the grass around those brown dead circles had begun to grow back, but the grass that had been burnt brown, it was just dead. Kind of like when the hair would fall out of the people and it wouldn't grow back, like the follicle was just killed. Well, it's similar to that. That was the last straw for Terry, and he put in motion the plan to sell the ranch at that point. I know that you might be thinking, like, why would you not have done it a long time ago? But also you have to think about how much money that they put into this place and moving there, how much of a huge task it was to take on to move their entire farm. And they really wanted to make it work, but it was a mess from the get-go.
Well, and you got to think, farmers are usually really level-headed, logical people. They're not going to just wig out and be like, we're being abducted or haunted or whatever. They want to know why things are happening, and they can be very stubborn too as well.
Well, oh, for sure. And yes, we'll totally get into that. And plus, it just would make no sense for them to be making this up. It was a huge undertaking to move there, and they had to sell this place only 18-20 months after they moved. Like that would be a pain in the butt if you were just moving a house, not an entire ranch of livestock and, you know, all sorts of stuff. Like, it was a big deal. So at this point, the story of the Sherman's Ranch flooded the media, and it caught the attention of a very wealthy businessman and his organization, the National Institute for Discovery Science. His name is Bob Bigelow. His National Institute for Discovery Science was comprised, which we'll call NIDS, so that we don't have to continue to say that entire word. It was comprised of 3 PhD scientists and a world-class multidisciplinary advisory board that was handpicked of various disciplines in mainstream science. This wasn't a bunch of wackadoos, you know, that, I don't know, have no formal education. Like, they were trying to really investigate some paranormal incidents that typically don't get any funding whatsoever because Bob Bigelow has the money to put behind it.
Yeah. They're not just out there playing like UFO hunter either. They're like legitimate scientists. They want to know why things are happening.
Yeah. They want to collect physical data to help support these claims and to try to figure out what the heck's going on. And it was soon after creating the NIDS that Bigelow bought the Sherman Ranch. And something that I was flabbergasted to find out was that Terry Sherman took a job with NIDS as the ranch manager because he could just not let this shit go.
Yeah.
He was, like you said, he was stubborn, or so farmers can be stubborn, but he was like, I do not want to just abandon this. So I was essentially kicked off this ranch by something, and I'm not going to just let it go and let this thing get the best of me. Like, I want to figure out what is happening. So he took on the job of taking care of the livestock and making sure because they had livestock and they had animals on the ranch to help them with their experiments. And so he was in charge of keeping those in order. But I mean, I couldn't believe it because, you know, you spend all this time, you know, being essentially harassed and threatened by this, whatever it is, and now you're choosing to come back to this place that you once owned as an employee, or only weeks ago he lived there. So anyway, on Kelleher's first visit to the ranch, Terry took him on a tour and showed him at the fence line 2 of his neighbor's cattle who had gone missing a few weeks prior, and they had been found that morning dead 30 feet apart with their heads under the barbed wire fence. The NIDS veterinarian said that it was extremely unusual for them to die in this position, which I definitely would agree. I would like to see a photo of that. I'm kind of curious about what they mean. Like, were they standing with their heads under the fence, or were they lying down? I'm not really sure. He also showed him 2 carcasses of 2 of his cattle that had been mutilated, and that's when he told him that it took them almost a year to be reduced to bone, which is something that happens in that climate in usually 2 weeks. So we have no idea why the rate of decomposition would be so drastically altered, but it did. He showed him these giant scoop marks in the ground that were 3 to 4 feet in diameter that were by the 3rd homestead, that they determined that each scoop would weigh hundreds of pounds and would need heavy machinery to dig it out, but there was no marks anywhere, and the Shermans did not notice anything being on their property. When Terry first noticed the scoops, he said that they had straight sides, like a cookie cutter came in and scooped out the soil. But with time and weather, the grass started to come in, and they could no longer see that they were straight. But still, he never saw any piles of dirt anywhere else around. And what the heck did that? You know, I mean, again, it's like heavy machinery is involved somehow without actually being there, without them seeing it, leaving any tracks whatsoever. And you remember Shai mentioned at the beginning of the episode that there was the sound of machinery that they would hear sometimes, but like you wouldn't see any. There wasn't anything there, you know, visually they could not see anything.
Well, why would you need such a large soil sample?
I have no idea.
Like you could just get like a tube.
Yeah.
Like a little test tube.
I have no idea.
That works fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if anybody has any good explanation for any of these bizarre occurrences, please let us know, because I truly couldn't think of anything that would explain why the soils would be scooped out like that, why they would hear the machinery noises but there would be nothing there, why their ground would shake. I mean, it's very strange. And they only had, like, I want to emphasize, they only had one entrance into the entire ranch, and it was one gate, one entrance, that's it.
Yeah. And they said, well, unless there's some entrance we don't know of, but when you own a ranch, you kind of have to know it inside and out, you know?
Right. So the entrance that we might not know of is a portal to another dimension.
Yep.
That would be the only thing that would be explainable for that. So the NID's first order of business was to collect firsthand experience of these events, and they expected that this would take weeks to months. So that is, I think for now, where we're going to stop with the experiences that happened on the ranch. I mean, that is a hefty amount of experiences that happened on the ranch and around it. And then next episode, we will talk about the actual scientific investigation that happened on the ranch after the Shermans sold it to Bob Bigelow, what happened with that, and also our theories about what could be going on here that I honestly, at this point, I'm like, I don't know.
And I also want to know everybody else's, if you've had an experience.
Yes.
I'm curious here.
Right. We definitely would like, we were just talking today about how we would like to have, I think that Skinwalker Ranch is a perfect intro to October and the creepy business that goes on in October. So
it's harvest season.
So this series is going to be our longest series that we've done to date, because it was impossible to get all of this into just 2 episodes.
Yeah.
And I really don't care, because it's extremely interesting and creepy. So like I said, it's perfect to get us into October. And then, we would really like for our last episode in October to be a listener experiences episode. Yeah. So, and I'm not, whatever experience that you may have, we're not limiting it to only lights in the sky. Like, whatever you want to tell us, we'll read it. And yeah, it would be really fun to hear if anybody has stories like Shy's too, because I'm curious, because I myself have not seen anything that I'm aware of, at least. And maybe I'm too closed off to have realized that I'd experienced something, but as it stands, I haven't. And I'm not asking for it either. Skinwalker is sitting outside my window.
You're like, but no.
I'm not looking for it, but so anyway, so that's the first thing we wanted to talk about before we end this little episode is send us your stories, please. I know you've got some, because between the 2 of us, we've got 3 here. I have 0, but we have 3.
Apparently, 1 out of 2 people will have a story. So
yes, that's the scientific data that I've collected so far.
I did the data.
So, give us your story. I think either on Facebook Messenger, you can message the podcast, or send it to creepitrealpod@gmail.com. And we will feature you on our last little episode, or whatever. We'll feature you on our listener stories episode in October. So we're giving you plenty of time to get it all typed up and send it over to us, and we will read it on the show.
Yep.
So that's our first thing, which I think that's extremely exciting. I'm excited to hear y'all's stories. The second thing that I would like to bring up is that, so we have a PayPal that we have started for the podcast, so that if any of you feel so inclined to help contribute funds to this PayPal, can help us.
So the funds would really help us, with any equipment that we needed for faster turnaround time, possibly with editing, getting out episodes, equipment for recording if we need to. Eventually, we would love to have some merch to get out to you guys well. But starting all that stuff up is expensive. And
yeah, it really is. And I know that some of you have asked about shirts, and we would love to get some shirts made, but it is really expensive. And
it's not like we can just buy a single shirt either. Like we have to get them made in bulk from a distributor.
So that is another thing we were going to bring up. So if you would be interested in getting a Creep It Real shirt, and you would actually want to buy and purchase one, buy and purchase. No, you would actually like to purchase one, let us know also, because we can kind of get a head count and see how many people would be interested in getting a shirt, and then it can help us plan for this, and we might be able to do a bulk order for everybody to start off.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there's another thing that let us know your stories, but also let us know if you would be interested in purchasing a Creep It Real shirt, so that and I think that for now that the design would be our logo. So
hopefully.
Yeah. Which is beautiful and detailed, and that ended up being a decent amount of cashola.
It was just a more difficult pattern to replicate and print on a screen. So
anyway, okay, so there's that. So let us know if you'd like a shirt. We set up our PayPal. I'll put a link up on all of our social media for that, just to let you guys know, because also I don't want to sit here and pat ourselves on the back too much, but it does take a lot of work for researching, for compiling these episodes together, and any sort of donation that you would be inclined to make would be so much appreciated. And I would even go so far as to say that we will give you a little thank you in return, and we'll mail you a homemade thank you note. So, and I'm not talking like I'm going to buy a card and sign my name. I'm talking I'll make you a thank you note. Because we just haven't started the Patreon yet, and I'm getting it together, but for now, this PayPal is gonna be the deal. So you'll get a little thank you, and then soonly I'm going to start that Patreon that will give you some incentives to donate to the show and help fund us for...
It would just mean we'd be able to put even more time and attention to detail into the pod.
Right.
To, content can always be bettered. There's no perfecting a podcast.
Right.
So that's always something we could work harder to be better at. So, but like you said, it takes up so much time and energy. It's like...
It really is. It would also, it would bring up more opportunities to have people help us as well. And just to get better and better as we go. So... Like we said, we appreciate you immensely listening and giving us reviews and subscribing to the podcast, but this is just another level of support that you could give us. And that said, please go and make sure that you have subscribed to the podcast so that you're, notified whenever new episodes are released. And also that you give us some delightful reviews on iTunes or whatever platform that you listen to us on. If there's a way to leave a review and rate us, that would be awesome if you could do so. And again, share us with your friends and family who you feel may be interested in the topics that we cover.
Yeah. That's pretty much it, I think. Okay. Well, hope y'all have a wonderful rest of your week, whatever day it is.
Yeah. Don't be too scared whenever you're walking around.
Don't get abducted.
Try not to get abducted.
Yes.
Make sure that you vocalize to any skinwalkers that may be around that you aren't interested in their tomfoolery. You have to let them know. It's important.
Make them buy you dinner first.
If you see any refrigerator-shaped UFOs flying around your property, ask them if they have some snacks. Maybe a cold drink,
Yes.
Like, get something from them. Right. Get something out of this. If they're going to be there, you might as well get something. So, anyway.
I guess we'll see you guys. Okay, whatever. We'll see you guys next time.
Creep it real, guys. Creep it real, guys. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.